Hi, this is Debbie, and for my Doodling with Debbie feature for Simon Says Stamp this month, I'm pulling out my pencils on craft for a soft winter snowflake look. I'm going to be using the Outline Snowflakes Cling Mount stamp set from Simon Says Stamp. This is from their latest fun and festive release, and I love snowflakes so much for winter cards. Their elegance of form and the peaceful symbolism is just perfect for this time of year. Eventually, I'm going to white heat emboss the outlines of these snowflakes, but for now I'm simply going to stamp them on craft card with clear embossing ink. This gives a tone-on-tone look and a guide in which to colour without having the raised lines of embossing getting in the way. Also, when you colour with pencils around embossed lines, you can get pencil all over the lines and then have to go in with an eraser to tidy up. Embossing after colouring keeps those white lines pristine. So I've zoomed in and speeded up the colouring of this video. In total, I think it took me 40 minutes to colour this panel, so this isn't a card you would intend making many of. I started with a white pencil, and using the tone-on-tone lines of the embossing ink as a guide, I coloured lightly with a Faber-Castell white Polychromo pencil. These pencils are my favourite as they have a harder lead than Prismacolor pencils, and so keep a sharp point without breaking easily. Having got a light layer of white pencil down over the snowflake, I decided to add some icy blues to the snowflake centres. Again, I'm using a light hand at this point to simply get the colour down. Once I've got a light blue and then a little more depth with the dark blue, then that's the time to start pressing harder with a pencil to blend them together. You could use a blending medium such as Gamsol, but I prefer to use the pressure of the pencil to blend the colours together. In particular, the lightest colour that I'm using at any one time I find to be the best for blending. In this case, this is the white pencil. Once you start to add pressure when colouring with pencils, that's when you get a bit of pencil dust knocking about. And so having a soft bristled brush, such as the Perfect Pearls brush from Ranger, is a good idea to brush away the dust and keep the panel nice and clean. I coloured the rest of the panel in exactly the same way, and so let's jump ahead to where the panel is now fully coloured. Well, I say fully coloured, I actually used a card blank as a guide to work out quite how much of the background I actually needed to colour, as eventually I'm going to trim this panel down. However, you don't want to trim the panel down quite yet, because having left the piece of craft card to the exact size it was when I stamped it, and having left the stamp in the MISTI in the same place, then when I stamp it again and this time white heat emboss it, all the lines will match up perfectly. Now that I've stamped the outline snowflakes for the last time, I can now trim the panel down so that it will be sized slightly smaller than an A2 card base. Before we move on, I want to mention that if you haven't got coloured pencils, then perhaps you could use another product to get a similar look. Here on the scrap of craft paper I've trimmed away from my panel, you can see that a white gel pen works well to colour in the snowflakes. You just have to be careful not to go over areas that you've already coloured, or the pen drags a line into the white to reveal the coloured card underneath. Colouring with a white gel pen would, as with pencils, take a little while. However, if you want a quicker solution, then painting the snowflakes with white gouache would work well. Gouache is an opaque watercolour, and so white gouache will cover over the craft card easily. You could equally blend a little blue into the centre of the snowflakes. This way, as long as you don't add too much water, then the craft card will stand up well, especially if you use a thicker 100-pound weight of Neenah Desert Storm card, as I have done here. For this card, I like the semi-opaque look of the white pencil on craft, and having shown the colouring with the white gel pen, it got me thinking that a few white gel pen dots would be a nice addition to embellish the snowflakes a little. For the sentiment, I pulled out the Merry dies from Kathy Zilski. I like these type of dies which come with a shadow as well as the word die itself. At first I die cut the Merry die from Soft Navy card and the shadow die from Neenah Solar White card. However, I found the Soft Navy card to be a little dark and not quite the right colour, and so I coloured with pencils. I'd coloured the snowflakes on a piece of white card to create my own matching piece of coloured card from which to cut the Merry word die. I add a Nuvo Deluxe adhesive to the back of the word die and then attach that to the white shadow die cut. I like using wet adhesive when adhering these types of word dies together, as there is little time before the glue dries in which you can adjust the placement to get the shadow perfectly aligned. I added foam adhesive to the back of the Merry word and then decided on where to place it. I have a few favourite places to add focal points. Dead centre, but raised above the midpoint is 1, but more often than not, I prefer to offset my focal points either top left or bottom right, and for today I chose the latter. I added foam adhesive to the back of the craft panel, and then adhered it to a white side-folding A2 card base. I wanted to add a companion sentiment to the Merry Word, and chose the Tiny Words Christmas set. This set has a couple of options for using Merry as part of the sentiment, and I chose the Merry and Bright one and did a little stamp surgery to cut off the Merry part of the sentiment. However, I wasn't looking closely enough and found I'd cut off the wrong part and had cut off the Bright word instead. And so I cut the Merry word off correctly this time and aligned the and Bright words together again on stamp, and then stamped them with clear embossing ink on a scrap of card coloured with the darkest pencil, and then sprinkled with white embossing powder before heat setting. So this shows how easy it is to align stamps back together again after surgery, so don't feel afraid that you won't be able to stamp the sentiments complete again, because you can. Finally, I chose a few embellishments to take this card up a sparkly notch or two. I added the darkest of the blue sequins from Neat and Tangled Starry Nights, along with a few silver glossy dots from Pink and Main, and then finally I added a few simply white Nouveau crystal droplets. However, I wasn't quite finished with the sparkle yet and covered the blue centres of the snowflakes with a sparkle pen for a little extra shimmer. And that completes this card with softly pencil-coloured snowflakes on craft card. On the Simon Says Stamp blog you will find a coordinating blog post as well as details of the supplies I've used today. If you want to find me, I blog over at limedoodledesign.com. I want to thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.